was around midnight when I finally got to my apartment, exhausted after a long day at work. The building was so quiet that even the sound of my footsteps seemed to echo louder than usual. As soon as I entered the hallway leading to my apartment, something made me stop. It wasn't a sound or even a movement. It was a feeling. Presence, maybe? You know that feeling, right? That intuition that something's off, even though you can't explain why. I took a few steps and that's when I saw it. The mirror, large and imposing, at the end of the hallway. But that night, it looked different. It wasn't the mirror itself, but the reflection. Something about it didn't add up. In the reflection, I could see my living room as usual, but it seemed darker, more sinister. There was a shadow, a vague figure, right in the corner of the reflection. It looked like it was watching me. I froze, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I looked directly at the corner of the room where the figure should have been. Nothing. But in the mirror, it was still there. And then something made me freeze in place. I looked at the mirror again, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a shadow cast by something outside the window, or maybe it was just my exhaustion playing tricks on me. You know how it is, your mind starts to create things when you're tired. But that shadow, that figure, it wasn't moving. It wasn't some passing illusion. And the longer I looked, the clearer it became. It was a human silhouette, standing there, like it was watching me from the other side of the mirror. But the problem was, there was no one in the room. I took a step back, trying to shake off the feeling that something was very wrong. I even tried to laugh at myself, like, it's just in your head, man. Nothing more than that. But my eyes couldn't pull away from that thing in the mirror. And that's when I realized, the figure in the reflection was closer than before. I hadn't moved, but it had. My breathing became heavy, and the silence of the apartment started to feel deafening. Every second I looked at the mirror, the figure moved closer, almost imperceptibly. That's when reality hit me all at once. This wasn't my imagination. That thing in the mirror was alive. Somehow. So, on an impulse, I decided to test a theory I hadn't even wanted to consider. I turned my body sideways, pulling my gaze away from the mirror for a second, and looked directly at the corner of the room where the shadow should be. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The room was empty, but the reflection, my God, the reflection, the figure was now closer, almost right next to me. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was distinct, almost human. Its features, though blurred and undefined, stared at me with suffocating intensity. And in that moment, my heart raced, because I realized that thing wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was coming through it. Panic took over my mind. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to run, but my feet were glued to the floor, like some invisible force was holding me there. The figure kept getting closer, slowly, deliberately, as if it knew I was completely at its mercy. My body reacted before my mind did. In a desperate move, I turned abruptly, forcing myself away from that cursed mirror. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the lock with trembling hands, feeling like time was dragging. The doorknob felt stuck, like the apartment itself wanted to keep me inside. And then I heard it, a sound, low and subtle, coming from behind me. A whisper? No, it was more like movement, like something or someone was crawling out from the other side. I turned just enough to catch a glimpse of it, the figure halfway out of the mirror, as if it was materializing into my reality. I shoved the door with all my strength, and finally, it gave way. I stumbled out, heart racing, but the feeling that it was following me made me keep running, without looking back. I ran down the hallway of the building, my mind blank except for the need to get as far away as possible. The air felt heavy, each step echoing as if something was right behind me. I felt that whatever it was, it had come out of the mirror. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't human, and it wanted me for some reason I wasn't willing to find out. When I finally reached the stairs, I glanced back one last time. The hallway was empty, but that silence, it was more oppressive than any noise I could imagine. Something told me that whatever it was still there, watching. I stumbled down the stairs, nearly tripping, struggling to stay calm. Each floor felt like an eternity. When I reached the street, the cold night air wrapped around me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my heart, which felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. But even out there, with the city lights and the distant sounds of cars, I didn't feel safe. It was as if that thing had marked me somehow, like I was now part of its world. In the days that followed, I tried not to think about the mirror. I moved out of that apartment the very next day, left everything behind. But, no matter how hard I tried to forget, no matter how much I told myself it was just my imagination, every time I pass by a mirror, I feel that same presence. Like, at any moment, I could look and see it, waiting to come out again. It was around 3 in the morning when a distant sound pulled me out of sleep. Footsteps, soft but steady. They were coming from the hallway, just outside my bedroom. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe some noise from a neighbor. But those footsteps, they were inside my house. You know that feeling when fear starts building in your chest, slowly, like the air around you gets heavier? I felt that. Every beat of my heart seemed to sync with the footsteps outside. I got up, trying to make as little noise as possible, and walked toward the bedroom door. I carefully opened it, and the hallway was there, empty. But the footsteps, they were still going, like they were one step ahead of me. I stood frozen at the door, trying to listen more carefully, with my heart pounding so loud it almost drowned out every other sound. The footsteps stopped for a second. I took a deep breath, convincing myself I was just imagining things, that maybe it was the old wooden floor creaking on its own. But then, the smell. A strange smell started to fill the air. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Damp, metallic, like rust. My stomach turned, and my gut told me something was terribly wrong. I stepped into the hallway, and the sound of the footsteps started again, just ahead of me, as if it was waiting. With the faint light coming from the living room window, I looked down at the floor. And then the marks. Wet footprints. Not shoes, but bare feet. They started right outside my bedroom door and trailed down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness. I wasn't alone in the house. My body went rigid. The wet footprints were fresh, as if someone had just walked through. I looked at my own feet. They were dry. This wasn't me. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the rising panic, but the smell of rust got stronger. I followed the footprints carefully, one step at a time, each of my own steps echoing in the hallway. As I moved, the sound of the footsteps ahead seemed to get more distant, but the footprints kept going, leading to the end of the hallway where nothing. I reached the living room door. The footprints ended right there, but no one was around. Everything was quiet, but something felt wrong about the atmosphere. That's when my eyes caught something. In the corner of the room, a detail I had never noticed before. Behind a pile of old boxes, there was a door I had never opened. In fact, I didn't even know it existed. My mouth went dry instantly. I knew every inch of this house, or at least I thought I did. That door, it didn't make sense. How could it have been there, hidden all this time? I hesitated for a moment, but the smell of rust became unbearable, as if it was coming directly from behind that door. I approached slowly, the floor creaking under my feet as I tried not to make any noise. With each step, my heart pounded harder, and part of me wanted to run, but curiosity, or maybe fear, was pulling me forward. When I finally reached the door, I noticed something even stranger. It was covered in scratches. Long marks like someone or something had desperately tried to get out. The doorknob was cold to the touch, and for a second, I thought about turning back. But something inside me, an inexplicable feeling, made me twist the knob. The door creaked open with a long, agonizing groan, revealing a deep darkness. My heart was in my throat. Inside, The air was thick and suffocating, and I couldn't see anything but shadows. Then I saw it. Something moved, very quickly, toward the back of the room. The shadow moved so fast I barely had time to process it. An indistinct figure, something that shouldn't have been there, retreating into the darkness of the hidden room. My body froze, adrenaline took over, but I knew I couldn't just stand there. I took a step back, nearly tripping over my own feet, trying not to lose sight of that space, of that shadow. Then came the sound. A muffled sound, a slow dragging, like something or someone was moving again inside. But this time it wasn't going toward the back of the room. It was coming toward me. My muscles reacted before my mind. I slammed the door shut, feeling the impact echo through the house. My breathing was heavy, the air felt thicker, and my body was on high alert. I took a few more steps back, keeping my eyes fixed on the closed door, waiting, listening, for any sign that it was still on the other side. Silence returned, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of heavy silence, like the whole house was holding its breath with me. I knew I couldn't stay there another second. With my heart racing, I turned and ran for the exit, getting out of that house as fast as I could. But to this day, every time I think about that door, when I picture those wet footprints, I wonder, was it really locked? Or did something get out? You know that feeling when everything finally seems to be falling into place, but then something strange happens? That's exactly what happened to me. I had just moved into a new house. It was old, but it had a certain charm. After the video, all I wanted was peace and quiet, a place to start over. And this house seemed like just that until the first night. In the middle of the night, something woke me up. It was a sound, faint but distinct, a creaking noise. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, the typical sounds old wooden floors make. But this sound, it kept repeating. It was the creak of a door, slowly opening and closing. Strange, because I was sure all the doors were locked. I got out of bed, cautiously listening as the creaking continued. I followed the sound through the dark hallway until I reached the garage. I hadn't really touched that part of the house since I moved in, but the sound was definitely coming from there. The air was heavy and cold, and at the back of the garage, there was an old wooden door, one I didn't remember seeing before. That door, it was out of place, like it didn't belong to the original structure of the house. Every step I took toward it felt harder. The creaking had stopped as soon as I entered the garage, and now the silence was suffocating. I got closer and examined the wooden door carefully. It was old, much older than the rest of the house, and it was locked with rusty chains that hadn't been touched in decades. But the strangest part was the feeling I got as I approached it. A strong smell of dampness mixed with something metallic, like rust. But there was nothing on the floor or walls that could explain the odor. For a moment, I thought about turning back, ignoring what was happening. It was irrational to mess with that door, but something inside me, a curiosity I couldn't contain, made me reach for the chains. As soon as I touched them, a chill ran down my spine. It was like the door was alive, waiting for someone to open it. My hands trembled as I tried to undo the chains. The metal was cold and seemed almost fused to the door from the rust. Every movement made the metal grind against the wood, echoing in the empty garage. Finally, after a lot of effort, the chains fell to the floor with a heavy thud. I stood there for a moment, taking deep breaths, trying to understand why I was about to open that door. Something in me told me it was a terrible idea, but it was too late. My curiosity had already taken me too far. I slowly turned the knob, feeling the resistance of the swollen wood. When the door finally gave way and opened, a heavy, stale air rushed out, as if the place hadn't been opened in years. The smell was stronger now, almost unbearable. I peeked into the darkness that filled the space, and that's when I saw it. The floor was covered in deep scars, jagged marks as if something or someone had fought to escape. The marks on the floor were disturbing. Deep, uneven, they stretched across the surface like something had been dragged, or worse, tried to escape desperately. The silence was thick, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. There was no rational explanation for what I was seeing. I took a step forward, trying to see further into the hidden room. The darkness seemed to stretch beyond the reach of the faint light from the garage. Then I noticed something. In the farthest corner, something glinted faintly, a reflection maybe of metal. I moved closer, cautiously, each step echoing in the empty space. As I got closer, I could see what it was. In the middle of the marks on the floor, there was an old diary, its pages yellowed and its leather cover worn with age. Hesitant, I picked it up and started flipping through it, the pages crackling under my fingers. The first entries were disorganized, almost incoherent, but one thing became clear as I read. Whoever had lived here knew something was trapped behind that door, and they were afraid of it. The words in the diary were hurried, almost scribbled. The entries grew more and more chaotic, describing noises at night, shadows that weren't supposed to be released, and finally, something that should never be set free. The tone of desperation increased with each page until I reached the last entry. Just one sentence. "If you open the door, it will find you." My stomach tightened. My entire body went on high alert, as if the very air around me had changed. The floor beneath my feet felt colder, and the darkness in the room seemed to move, subtly, almost imperceptibly, until I realized I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. In the far corner of the room, the darkness seemed thicker, more alive. And then I saw it. It wasn't a clear figure, but a movement, like the shadows were shifting, forming something. That's when my instincts finally kicked in. I dropped the diary and ran out of that room, slamming the door behind me with all my strength. I hurriedly refastened the chains as quickly as I could, my heart racing, while that low sound, almost like breathing, continued inside, as if something was waiting. I left the garage and never went back to that place. But to this day, whenever I'm alone, I can still feel that presence. Like somehow, something escaped that night, something that's waiting for the right moment to reveal itself.